Hello and thanks for joining us for this week's edition of France in Focus. This week we've got our eye firmly fixed on the French national railway operator. This is the company is on track for some major reforms aimed at making it more competitive, also aimed at reducing its debts, which currently run into the tens of millions of euros. Well, the former CEO of Air France has submitted no less than 43 proposed measures to President Macron, aimed at reversing the fortunes of the cash-strapped SNCF. Amongst them, less generous conditions for employees. But on that note, people that work for the SNCF argue there's a certain amount of exaggeration in the public realm about their terms of employment. But we're going to start by taking a closer look at their daily reality.
As railway workers dig their heels in, France is set for months of disrupted travel. Thousands are on strike, angry at Emmanuel Macron's proposed overhaul of the public sector. Many SNCF staff enjoy special contracts. These include early retirement, protection from dismissal, and generous holiday leave. Privileges that the government plans to scrap. But railway workers believe there are misconceptions about the benefits they receive. Amélie's a prolific tweeter. She tells her followers about her working day, lets them know if a train's delayed, and tries to combat the clichés around her work.
I have 28 days of holiday a year, but I work weekends, bank holidays, and do shift work.
As a train conductor, Amélie sometimes has to deal with disapproval from passengers who believe she gets an easy ride.
I don't want to use the word hate. That's a bit strong. But there's definitely aggression from some people. Train conductors work long hours and are often in the cold. Yes, other people do the same, but those aren't the jobs that we are talking about. People say railway workers are lazy, but no, they are there every day of the year.
One of the measures the government wants to change, a scheme offering railway workers' families reduced fare prices. It currently costs the SNCF 100 million euros a year, while the SNCF's annual deficit stands at 3 billion euros. 29-year-old Antoine Baron is a train driver for the SNCF. Every minute of his working day is scheduled.
I'm preparing the technical information for each line. I link it to the trains I'm going to drive. It's timed. I have 13 minutes to do all of it.
Working long shifts, responsible for the lives of hundreds of passengers. In exchange for these stressful conditions, many drivers have the right to retire at 52 years old. But that's not the case for newer recruits.
I joined in 2010 after the reforms, so I will finish later. The age has been pushed back, the legal retirement age. In any case, I need to do 166 trimesters. As I started at 22 years old, I will retire like most French people after I'm 60.
Changing trains before setting off again. Antoine has many more miles to cover before the end of his working day.
Well, for some time now, there's been lots of speculation about what form the eventual shake-up of the railway network might take. Well, one of the ideas put forward was that large sections of little-used and costly track be shut down. And that's something that's angered people in communities where those railway services are a lifeline.
The Aubrac train links the southern French cities of Béziers and Clermont-Ferrand. Many commuters depend on it to get to work. Yet, with less than 400 daily users, it's still considered a minor train line.
Our company's main goal is to serve the public. These lines may not be profitable, but they are useful.
France's national rail company considered shutting down the Aubrac train, but with the state agreeing to share some of the operating costs, it's pushed the decision back to December 2018, giving the line a 2-year hiatus. These commuters recently launched a committee to defend what they see as their train.
There's a lot of us, and we're far more determined than those who only think about money.
The Aubrac train is not alone. In the same region, the Cévennes line is also under threat. These students take it every Monday to get to their school in Langogne.
It's the only way for high school students to get to Langogne.
The line is losing money, but the government recently accepted to foot the bill until 2022 while leaving the region in charge of the trains. a gesture locals hope can help save the Cévennes line, which they say is central to fuel the region's economic activity.
The nearest high-speed train station is 2.5 hours away. Same thing for the nearest highway. The Cévennes train can never be replaced by a bus.
Yet that's exactly what's happening elsewhere. The train from Verdun to Châlons-en-Champagne was replaced by a bus 4 years ago, a change that's frustrated many commuters.
The commute's 30 minutes longer, and it's the same price as a train ticket.
Since the change, the number of daily passengers has dropped by 50%. According to the mayor of Verdun, the French government's unwillingness to act is a form of discrimination.
They just want to service large cities and urban centres. But we shouldn't be treated like second-class citizens because we live in the countryside. We're proud to be here, and we do have a future.
Renovating this train line would cost an estimated 40 million euros, an amount local officials were not willing to pay.
Well, we're now at the iconic Train Bleu restaurant at Paris Gare de Lyon. It's a restaurant where many great journeys have begun and ended ever since the Exposition Universelle, the World Fair, back in 1900. Well, to talk more about those proposed reforms at the SNCF, I'm joined now by Gilles Dansard, who is the founder and director of Mobilettre, which is a website specializing in transport news. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Let me start by asking you, how important do you think it is that these reforms are put into action?
Le ferroviaire français ne va pas bien aujourd'hui.
France's train industry isn't doing well. There are too many delays and the network needs to be modernized. So we had to do something to save the industry. Reforms were necessary for the French to stop complaining about train travel. The second reason why we needed to reform is that the EU, that Brussels, is now forcing French rail to open up to competition. So we needed to adapt French laws to fit that requirement.
À cette donne. Après, la question est de savoir si elle répond concrètement.
Now the question is whether this change does address all the problems that the SNCF is facing today. The first one being its aging infrastructure.
Pendant 20 ans, on a privilégié.
For 20 years, we favored high-speed trains and we forgot about the rest of the network.
Tout le réseau secondaire. La deuxième urgence, c'est de baisser.
The second emergency is to lower costs. The SNCF admits it's 30% more expensive than its future competitors. The third thing we need to work on is to rejuvenate the SNCF brand.
And you think it's likely that perhaps France will go down the same route as other countries in Europe, where some sections of track are owned by the public sector and others are owned by private enterprises? Is that likely to happen here in France, do you think?
Even with the increased competition, the SNCF will remain an important actor for French rail, a bit like Deutsche Bahn in Germany, which still controls around 70% of the country's regional transportation market. But private actors can bring two things to the table. First, they will help lower costs for the regions and perhaps for passengers as well. And they will also help fuel innovation for customers.
It's very easy, isn't it, to get caught up in this whole debate, and you look at the debt position of the SNCF. They owe tens of billions of euros. But we mustn't forget, must we, that the SNCF is still one of the best railway operators in the world, isn't it?
The yearly turnover for the SNCF Group is currently around 35 billion euros, and with its subsidiaries in freight and passengers, it's present around the world. In the US, in Australia, and across Europe. So it's a very powerful group, which is something we often forget. And French rail only represents a fraction of its earnings.
For many years, France has enjoyed a dominant position as being one of the leaders in the railway sector. But do you think there's a risk that France is being left behind by other countries that are perhaps getting ahead of France?
Japan is a global reference point. In Europe, the Swiss are considered the masters of rail, but the SNCF has been too arrogant and is having a hard time learning from its competitors.
And finally, Gilles, talking to you, I can hear that you're very passionate about trains, you're very passionate about railway history. Looking back on France's railway history, would you say there had been a golden era that you particularly like looking back on?
After World War II, there was a first golden age, which was the Reconstruction period. Freight goods were being moved by train, and the French took the train to travel across the country. In the early 1970s, it fell apart a bit because a lot of French people were buying cars, which was a new and fascinating commodity. So train travel began to lag behind, but it was saved by the high-speed train in the early 80s. It was a second golden age, with these high-speed trains coming to the rescue of the SNCF by showing that a faster, more efficient train was possible.
Well, that's all we have time for this week's edition of France in Focus. We're going to leave you here at the Gare de Lyon in the heart of Paris. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and I'll see you again soon on France 24.